Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast, where we celebrate filmmaking, storytelling and cinema across the island of Ireland. So whether you're a diehard film fan or simply curious about the screen industries, make sure to subscribe so you can catch up on past conversations with great creatives like Hugh O'Connor and Helena Rain. So today we're really delighted to welcome screenwriter Malcolm Campbell. He's worked across TV and film on shows like Shameless, Bad Sisters or Skins, and feature films such as What Reacher Did and Herself. And now his really powerful drama 500 Miles is being released in cinemas. So have a listen to the trailer of that here.
We used to bring him down here. Do you remember? John! Jesus, you'll give me a bloody heart attack.
Well, you'll give me one standing there.
Grandad!
I told you to stop calling.
With my mum's until we sort something out.
This is your decision, not mine. Go on, Charlie.
What's going on, Finn? Where are we even going?
We just need to get to Grandad's. He'll know what to do.
About what?
Keeping us together.
These coffees, light refreshments.
Somebody needs to tell you to give up. Yes, shit.
I can't let you on without a responsible adult.
You're looking at
No,
us.
you've enough cheek for a new arse. You know that? Come on, get on.
Have your family over in Ireland?
Dingle, my granddad. Everything's been shit since they cut him off.
You can't keep blaming yourself, John.
Grandad, do you ever get lonely?
You know, now and then. We just have to savor the moment.
I said I'd get you there, and I will.
I miss you so much, and your beautiful boys. Charlie!
Wow!
You have no idea how sorry I am.
Don't know what to say.
No, I won't ever be safe.
You're here now. It's okay.
Thank you so much for chatting with us.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Your work is just so exceptional, and this is no exception. It's just such a beautiful, heartfelt film. But I was wondering if we could go back to the very beginning, and if you could tell me about the films that, or maybe like pieces of work or the things that you watched growing up that were the stories that touched you, that influenced the, like that you really resonated with first.
Well, as a younger viewer, I don't know, I was chatting to somebody recently. I did this thing here called Story House, which is the screenwriting festival, and I run the lab there where we kind of take a group of writers and I really put them through the mill and workshop them, and then they take part in the festival themselves. And I'll pepper them on the first day with a bunch of questions, like, and they may be very simple ones, but then I'll ask a really tricky one that throws them, because it's a way of excavating character, and like, I don't want to know about them, and so, but I also was subjected to it myself. But one of the things was like, what are your early memories of film? And I'm that old that the first film I went to see at the cinema was Star Wars.
Well, one of the classics, yeah.
I mean, and that blew my mind, with the scale of it, and just kind of like but it was also really simple storytelling. And so I think when I was young, I was kind of really drawn to, the ETs and then like films with just like big heart and but scale and spectacle as well. And certainly I remember, like my film viewing got more sophisticated as I got older, but the films that really stand out are like Stand By Me, and and that, we were reflecting on that when we were thinking about 500 Miles, because, there are elements of that we tried to capture, like the journey, the big heart, the humor, and interpersonal relationships as well. So there is a bit of connective tissue. I'm not saying 500 Miles is in any way like Star Wars, but
I suppose at the very beginning, it's a young person on a journey, and I think in the opening scenes, so this isn't too much of a spoiler or anything like that, there's difficulties at home, and that's clear, and then he goes chasing after something that reminds him of that happier past. And I think one of the things the film does so well is brings people on a journey, but like helps people process difficult things in a safe space. And like, this is what is done in this film exceptionally well. Like, he's going back to that happier time, and there's complexities there in the relationship with the grandfather, played beautifully by Bill Nighy. When you're writing a story like this, how much of it is you're thinking of an audience or yourself? Like, are you writing for someone? Are you capturing like some of your own experience? Are you kind of like, what is your process there when you're creating it?
The stuff that I find when I'm writing, and I do, like, I don't always, but like when it's working, I do feel like I've gone deep, and I think as a writer, you spend an awful lot of time in your head, and I'm writing at the moment, and I'm very distant and absent around the house. Like I've just got, I'm not very present because there's like the thing I'm writing, there's about 60 characters, so there's different voices in my head, and but on 500 miles there were, like, I knew that for it to work, it had to be really authentic, and it had to kind of capture a time and, a place, and to be in the heads of all the characters for all the scenes to work. And so like that involved kind of just going deep and spending time with them before I was writing. And, that's quite hard place to get to, but it pays off, because when you're writing trickier scenes, like scenes where parents are at their wits' end and arguing, and I know what they're arguing about, and we're not quite revealing everything to the audience. You have to write that as authentically as possible, and like it's quite hard to do that. And then like there's there are certain scenes in that film where it did work because I knew it was working because I was getting upset when I was writing them. And that usually is a good test. Or if you can make yourself laugh while you're writing something, because everyone's humor is very specific. But I kind of know if something makes me laugh, it might kind of come across. Because if like I don't know, you have your own kind of tuning fork and your taste and what works and what doesn't. And this particular story, because I adapted a book, so there was it's a beautiful kids book. It's very short, and like my kids would have had it in their school library, but it's very different and it's simple. And the original story is called Charlie and Me, 421 Miles from Home, and it takes place in England, and it's about two boys who run away from home to go and see a beloved dolphin. And that's kind of like so we stepped, in order to adapt it, we stepped away from that to give it kind of more scale.
Is that why it was Dingle, the dolphin?
Yeah.
I was like, oh,
yeah.
like I didn't actually realize there was a dolphin in the original adaptation. I was like, oh my God, that works so perfectly. Also, it's very hard to get to. Like, you have to go to Kerry, like to just, because Ireland is so small, it's always hard to justify a road movie, like when you can kind of like walk it in a couple of days. Like, you're like, how can you stretch that out? But it does get that beat and that kind of like resistance to getting there very authentically.
One of the decisions, so when this kind of came to me, I was sent the book, and I kind of knew one of the producers, and he said, oh, this might kind of resonate with you. And it was largely because he and I had this kind of quite extraordinary conversation, like as a general meeting, and where we kind of didn't really talk about work. We ended up going, it was a bit of a therapy session. We both experienced some quite difficult things at that time. And, it was a bit one of those, like, we massively overshared. And then I was like, oh God, that was a bit weird. We didn't talk about work really, and then just not long afterwards, he sent me this book and said, I think you'll like this. And there was something in the book that very quickly I just started crying, because it just, it reflected something that had happened in my life. And I was like, oh, okay, I see why you've sent it me. And as I was reading it, I was like, oh no, okay, I can see this is a film. It feels like a film. And then we luckily, and this I think the best experiences I've had in film is when there's a director on board early, because you develop this conversation with them, and they have a vision for it, you have and then you keep talking about how you want it to progress. And Morgan Matthews, brilliant director, and but he's had his largely huge documentary background, and he's made some beautiful documentaries, similar themes as well. you know, he's real. He lives in the real world, and he's reflected that on film. And so we talked about this particular story, but as we were talking about it, the pandemic hit, and then we were like, we don't know what people are going to go and watch at the cinemas anymore. And I think one of the big takeaways was, you know, if people are going to go back to cinemas, we're going to have to give them bigger stories, bigger emotions, more scale. And so what was originally a small-ish story that took place going down the coast of England, we were like, you know, he was like, you live in Ireland, I think we should go to the west coast of Ireland. And that unlocked everything, because then, you know, it's tricky for two boys to get across the water from England, you know, like, you know, and it's tricky getting on bits of public transport or not. And then it just gave us license to you know, step away from the original story. And actually in the original story, there's no granddad. So, and it was, you know, like, you know, I was like, you need to be running to somebody, you know. I think, you know, like, places from your, you know, we'll have like memories from our childhood if we're fortunate enough to go on holiday, and usually it's with people as well, you know, it's not just the place. And, you know, the dolphin was, I was like, I don't know if we'll ever get a dolphin, you know, so like it's quite an abstract concept. And I mean, fortunately there is a very famous dolphin in Ireland, so that's why we leaned into it. But you know, that, so, you know, I created a character of Grandad, you know, to see running to somebody. And, you know, Grandad, as you know, anyone who will have seen the film, is kind of, you know, you think they're running to Grandad to save their family, but Grandad may be the reason that the family's kind of disrupted. So, yeah,
and that's very nicely kind of seeded in. You do get that sense, you know, like there's the air of mystery. Why is he estranged from the beginning? And I think that's that kind of slow reveal. It's really beautifully written and so wonderfully performed. And you've two very solid UK actors doing gorgeous accents for once. And they sort of fit the roles so beautifully and have so much kind of charisma. At what stage in the writing process is it cast? Like, to have someone, you know, of Bill Nighy's ability, but he just brings that, like, that depth and charm.
yeah. Well, it initially, that role wasn't, because it was still being found in the various drafts, it was quite a small role. You know, in the credits it would be, you know, like, and Bill Nighy. You know, like, it, you know, when you see those kind of films. But as it developed, and the more, you know, he came on board he read quite, you know, a relatively early draft and liked it. He just liked the story. He wanted to play Irish. And then we were like, well, if you've got Bill Nighy, you might as well, you know, kind of write for him, you know, write for the character, beef it up. And he was very kind of specific, and I don't want to, it was a nice challenge, because you kind of don't want to, you know, we're familiar with him as the icon, but you want to bury him, and so that when you're watching him on screen, you don't see Bill Nighy. And so, you know, that was a challenge for me to kind of, you know, and I did a lot of kind of watching interviews with him, watching his films, and then just kind of stepping away from that and going, here's the character, and write for the character, so that I wouldn't pick up any tics or, you know, anything that, you know, he may have exhibited before. And
Both for him and Maisie Williams, it did feel like that, like, and that's sort of why I asked it. It sort of, it did feel like both characters were sort of designed for them. Like, when you're watching it, you couldn't imagine anyone else. And so when you're going through those later processes of drafting, does that help that you're, you know, imagining them saying the words? And I presume because you've written with Clare as well, that you know her so intimately as a performer, as you're going through those final drafts, like seeing them say the words and deliver those lines.
yeah, I mean, it helps. So what, you know, Bill was kind of cast first, because with films of this scale, you need to kind of, you know, have people with profile to raise the finance, you know, and that helped, you know, and so also with Maisie coming on board helped as well. And then you kind of go, but, you know, she came on board with that character fully formed in the story, and then she just brings, you know, a lot of charm and intelligence to it. And but with, you know, so latterly Claire, once we were having the discussion about who would play Jules the mum, you know, Claire was just kind of, always in our mind all the way through. And I it's funny, now I find it very hard, and in the best possible, I find it really hard to watch Claire on screen because she's such an open-hearted actor, and she gives it everything, and she kind of, she's very vulnerable on screen and in the best possible way. And that kind of, and in this particular role, she was given so much, and it's, it really works, and, I knew that if we were lucky to get someone like Claire, then that's that, you would feel for her, you understand, what she's going through, and, and also kind of like we had like I think he's an amazing actor, Michael Soccer, who, just watching anything, and, so him as the dad, and the dad character is a little bit like, that's probably the most like me.
It's very interesting because I always, like in work, there's always sort of one person that is that, and I would never have pegged the dad because there's so much, like his arc is there, and like he's sort of set up in one way, and then you have that slow reveal of information, and the psychology behind why he is like he is, when that kind of like mystery with the granddad is revealed, is very, very present. But like of all the people, I kind of felt like he was sort of the most reserved, but that was that performance. And then I suppose his journey is it's, even though he plays such a small role, it's like him and that like incredible young protagonist's emotional journey, and like everyone else does have that, but they've the biggest arcs, and that's very interesting.
I think as a parent, watching this, but also as a parent writing it, so like going back to what we were talking about earlier, like, I started off writing this going, oh, I could make a film that, like my kids could watch, and because so far there's nothing really I've done that they could watch. They couldn't be asked watching as well, but they also like certainly my wife produces, and she's made some amazing films, but none of them have been quite suitable yet. So.
And how old are your kids?
They're now 15 and 12. So like the 15-year-old probably is kind of going, oh, maybe I could watch Normal People, and I'm like, you're not watching it with me.
Yeah, no, more so.
But things like, definitely, I think like he'd love something like Rosie, which she made, and I think Herself and What Richard Did, maybe, like he's of that age. But with this, I was like, oh, maybe the kids would like this, and they did get to see it. And
that was sort of the question I was trying to ask earlier, but just not articulately enough. In more so that it's aimed for that younger audience. Are you writing with them particularly in mind? Because I know a lot of things that are specifically aimed at younger people these days tend to shy away from that darkness and like trauma and processing, kind of like messier emotions, and they tend to be, like very surface level. And that's sort of why I was asking about the things that you watched growing up as well, because there's so much sort of emotional heft to this that like it just felt much more complex, and like exactly like Stand By Me, like not afraid to look at those difficult things, that people are allowed to process them in that safer space, because like kids go through a lot, and to have things where they recognize themselves or can process those things, like it's really important. So I was kind of like trying to like poke for this, say what I was saying, but like ultimately that's what I particularly enjoyed with the film. And like probably is no harm if it ended up on a Leaving Cert program for people. Do you know, like that's my
yeah, no, I mean, like that would be great. I think you don't just want to write something, especially when it takes so long. And I've discovered this as well. You don't just want to write something that's disposable. And ideally, you write something that is about. So, I mean, we'll write stuff that's about stuff, we hope. But then the things that endure kind of get into your bones as well. And then they leave you thinking afterwards. And that's kind of like, I think the films that I've done here. I only have done films here, but the three films I've been involved with, I think you do leave the cinema having conversations, and that's kind of what you're always hoping for. And and hopefully if you watch it again, or if you're actively watching the film and something happens during the film that makes you reflect during the film, that's also something that I'm really interested in. So you do, and audiences are really smart and sophisticated, but they also want to be challenged as well. And I think there's no harm in saying to kids, okay, well, we're going to show you something that you might be able to relate to, but I'm also going to be asking questions of you as well and testing you to see whether you think this is truthful or funny. And then if there is a shift in tone, then the kids can absolutely handle it, because like you say, they've will go through stuff, and they may not have gone through the stuff in this film, or they may not have been involved in a terrible night out in South County Dublin or something like, but they'll understand that those things happen. And storytelling allows us to get into the heads of these characters and go, well, that could be you, and what would you do in that situation? And if you were, if you encountered these two boys on a journey, would you help as well? So I think if you can kind of hook an audience by creating characters who are both sympathetic but in crisis, then you can take them on a journey anyway, like a bigger journey.
And to go back into like building that depth and to like break down all those drafts, because I think what's very interesting, what you said in terms of, like the granddad wasn't there in the beginning. The adaptation was originally set in a different place. You're someone who works with writers to develop their craft. So in terms of then of, getting to the heart of your own story, when do you know when you're there? Are you're developing it, with Morgan, producers, like I think Screen Ireland, I presume, have like a development section. When are you kind of like sitting with the idea? You bring, other people in to give you notes yourself, as someone who's like, because like your own stuff is so much different to, like, it's so easy to see in other people's work, but
Yeah.
when you're so close, and obviously that it's so sort of, there's like that rawness there that you can sort of, like it is a thing where there were particular beats of it that were really true, and like in terms of levity, that bus driver, I could smell that he was a real person somewhere that you had met. I was like, I know that man. I don't know him particularly, but like I know he's true. When do you know that you're there with something like this?
I think this one was particularly hard because there was so many drafts of it, and because it was hard to write because there were two timelines in it.
And do you find development people are very averse to to flashbacks, or for something like this, there's a very important, like it is sort of like the whole thing is founded on that mystery, and there is beats where it's like tension build, levity release, emotional information reveal, like there are kind of things that are hit through them as well.
Yeah. I think people are always kind of hesitant, aren't they, with flashbacks, because they feel it's lazy storytelling. It's like, why can't you just tell the story in the present? And I get that, but not all stories work that way. And if one of the themes of the story is reflection and memory, then you do have to go back, and that you've given people, as a storyteller, that's your permission to go back.
Also, memory isn't linear, and grief isn't linear, and emotions aren't linear, and how you process, like, there are people that are very logistical, logical people, but I also think writers are not naturally that. Like, it's sort of everything everywhere all at once in terms of like processing that.
True. And so, in this we had, the producers, there weren't many. So the kind of the core team who were giving me notes, it grew. So you get financiers, and actually we had there's a sales agents who took on the film as we were kind of trying to raise finance, and we had a conversation with them, and I guarantee they gave a brilliant note. They gave a brilliant note that really helped the story, and I was like, and as a writer, you just want the thing to get better, and so, for the, that phase of the story, it was a really specific, really brilliant note.
Is it something that reveals a spoiler? I'm just interested to what that was.
No, it was just kind of, it was the balance of who we were with at the time in the story. So you spend a lot of time with the kids, but it was more like, what's going on in the parents' heads, and can we see a little bit more of them? And I was like, yeah, do you know what? Because, and actually once we started doing that, the story kind of evolved from like a younger person's story to a family story, and it kind of matured. It became like an older. So what started off in as a kind of a kid's story, and a family film, there would be kind of PG. It just like, if you're switching perspectives and spending more time with the adults, then it becomes a bit more mature. And so so I definitely, tonally it shifted, and it was that note that kind of gave me a license to kind of go, no, let's spend some time with them and see what their relationship's like. Because if you're starting a film with saying the family's falling apart, you kind of need to see what their relationship is like and whether there is hope for them as they go on their journey. So everybody in the process of the film has a journey, physical but also internal one.
I suppose that's probably very much so specifically a marketing thing where it's like older people will watch this film. And I suppose it's specifically for like Bill Nighy is a draw for Gen X and above and elder millennials, because he just is of that era and like an icon. And we've all watched him in things like Love Actually, and we've seen him be a gangster, and to have him play something that's quite emotionally mature as well as a lovely thing as an audience that that will sell to us. And I suppose you're hitting people of that generation, have teenagers or young adult kids that they'll be like, okay, we can go to this together. But it's interesting because like it kind of goes back to like who this film is for. The people that are selling the film are like, make it a little bit older.
Well, that was, you'd have thought, cynically, that they were maybe trying to kind of make it as wide so they could draw in a bigger audience. But actually, the note was more of a story note. It was just a bit like, I really want to spend time with these characters. And it wasn't, them with one eye on, maybe drawing in parents and that kind of. So actually, you did welcome anything, but it has, I think, because there is a range of ages, and because we get to spend time with all the characters, there's something for everybody. And that definitely evolved through the many, many drafts. It became something for, as Bill's character John, that his story grew, you kind of going, oh, well, maybe my mum is going to like this, and my mum did like it, and she's going to tell all of her friends, but like, so the silver screen crowd hopefully will watch.
They enjoyed it on Facebook, so we shared that post, and I can see the stats, and like specifically sort of expats, older Irish people. It went like, sometimes a post will go slightly viral on Facebook and you can see all the people, but they really liked it.
No.
And it was the picture, but I suppose it's almost like what's there, but it's more also like the perspective thing is, yeah, a distributor and people at the element, they understand more what the audience experiences, and like they're kind of thinking it from that perspective, and to get that like balance. And I suppose in terms of the arc, I don't want to ruin it, but like it is important as well to check back in. But yeah, no, I'm very interested to what that process is like. So we were saying about the financiers, so Commission Numan, Screen Ireland locally, internationally then, where was that finance raised outside?
So there was, it's largely Irish money. I'm very, very lucky. And we have, like a brilliant kind of Irish producer, Martina Nyland, so, she, so it kind of, it was sourced by a British company. But then, in order to kind of, they just wanted it to be really authentic and to have experts on the ground here, because we knew the story was bringing us here. So like Martina was a brilliant fit. And then it's kind of like you're applying for Irish money, and it's so Screen Ireland, Commission Numan. And then, there was then kind of a gap. And so like, how do you fill the gap? and you get that from like pre-sales. So like we knew that a year out of production, it was pre-selling to different territories. Like I think this is quite telling. One of the first sales was to the airlines, which is interesting because it's the kind of film that you'd go, if you were sitting on a long haul flight, you'd go, oh, what's this? If you weren't aware of it.
Oh yeah, it's like one of those ones that you're like, I'll just put this on, and then you're wrecked by the end of it.
I read the book on a plane and I was in bits. And I think, I think we've all had those plane experiences where you've either watched a film or read a book or something, and because your emotions are slightly heightened.
Why?
Because I think because you're in a big tin can in the air, but no, like it was one of the first sales. So you're raising money that way because you've had a pre-sale, and certain territories bought it, because they were like, oh well, we think this might play well in different parts of the world, and so you raise your money that way, and then you raise money through. I mean, I'm learning this because I was kind of more privy to this on this particular film. On previous films I wasn't, I was more just the writer. But yeah, so you kind of like you're trying to plug the gaps, and so there are loads of partners. So one of our our distributor in the UK would have put up some money as well, and so yeah, so we managed to raise the budget through all of these different parts, and the budget was kind of like you've seen the film, so I think it's all on screen. Like it literally is. There are certain set pieces, and like at no stage did anybody say you can't do this. Although actually no, that's wrong. I really did go with the kind of throwing everything at the screen and taking some big swings with this, and one of them was like with forms of transport, and so like we. I was going, oh, we'll never be able to film on a boat. We got to film on a ferry. Like we'll never get to film on a train. We got to film on a train. And I was going, well, what other forms of transport could we have? So, but anyway, we had to lose the bike. The bike went, and the Lewis went, and the Lewis was in till quite late. There was going to be like a little chase through, and I think it was just explained to me that actually to shut down. Well, you wouldn't shut down a Lewis. You'd be filming on the Lewis, and that could be quite tricky. So I was like, okay, but then you just find a elegant solution not to have the Lewis. But like the producers did that, and then in the climax of the film, it's taking place somewhere where normally a producer would say we're not going to go there for all sorts of reasons, safety and otherwise, and you've got a young cast, and we're not going to film in that particular location, and Morgan especially director who's like, no, we're doing this, and then that was it. It's like, and so I just kept thinking, oh, we're probably going to have to relocate that section of the film, have it somewhere that's a bit different, and you might have to it might involve quite a bit of surgery on the the last act. But no, he was like, no, we're going for this, and like to see that on screen is like, I think it's really effective, but it's also like it feels authentic as well.
Yeah, and like that, you get it's so strong, and all the elements of it are just incredibly strong. It's something that obviously will resonate with audiences, and obviously, like as a writer, it sounds as well like you were involved at every step of the process. So something like that, I suppose. Tell me a little bit about working on this alongside me, kind of bread and butter work, like your development work with other writers or Bad Sisters, something like this. Then when you kind of have a hand in it so creatively, which I was explaining to someone, writers don't always get to pick or be involved, and people are like, what, but it's your story. It's like, yeah, but you've so much to say, and like that, like if there's a technical issue, you can be brought in to fix things, and you're chatting with people about casting and working with people at that stage, which is really exciting. Then like the kind of bread and butter work like Bad Sisters, but presumably as well where you're working with different creative voices and picking things up. Is there times when it's sort of difficult to balance those beats and something like this takes priority? Like how do they all feed into one another in terms of your craft and your work, and then how do you balance them?
Actually, Bad Sisters was, so Sharon asked me to, because Sharon was one of the producers on Herself. And when Herself launched, and it was at Sundance, and it was like, it sold, and it had like the reaction to Herself was phenomenal. Like it really was. And then unfortunately, like the pandemic hit, like 2 months later. But there was Sharon had said to me, would you like to be involved in Bad Sisters? And she was kind of pitching it to me, and actually I said, I'm writing this film and I'd like to write this, I want to have a good crack at this. So it's 500 miles. And she's like, oh, cool. No. But actually, and they had to like have a writer's room for the first Bad Sisters all on Zoom. And it sounded like quite tricky. I don't know how they pulled it off. Well, I do, because she's amazing and she has really good people around her. But then in the middle of, the drafting and trying to raise the finance for 500 miles, they came back and said, we're doing another one. Would you like to be involved? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to, so, and that's like, it's great fun, but you are, and you're very much part of a team in both the crafting of the storyline, but then you are, writing a specific episode, and, and as much, the very good producers do involve you creatively with some of the decisions, but when it's your own show, you have more say. So Sharon would have been all over everything, and she's just phenomenal. But with film, I think it's changed. I think there's been a shift towards involving writers more, and I also asked for more on this. I was kind of, I wanted to be included in conversations if it was helpful, and so I think they're also leaning on me because I was, somebody who lives in Ireland and, been here for almost 20 years. And, it's kind of, for some local knowledge, if you're a British producer or a British director, it's helpful to have somebody on the ground who knows what the locations are, who the crew might be. It's helpful to, had I worked with people before, people I could recommend and that kind of stuff. So, but it's changed. I think writers, there's always been, it's a courtesy thing that you might include a writer in some conversations, but you don't. I remember with like what Richard did, which I did quite a few years ago now. Like Lenny was very generous and said come along to back in the day in-person auditions. So we did in-person auditions, and then we kind of workshopped with the young cast, and I was in the room always, and that isn't the case always. Like sometimes as a writer, you're just a writer for hire, you just do the writing, and so there's very clearly delineated roles, but more so like I've got opinions, but also like I understand, and this is one of the things I always say with the Story House Lab, like we're filmmakers, we're all filmmakers and we're collaborators. There is I don't see a hierarchy. Like at various points in the process, certain people ascend, so the director has to be above everything and making decisions, and they have to make the film. I largely don't go to set. I find it really stressful. And on this particular one, anytime I did turn up on set, somebody asked me to do something. So it was like, can you quickly rewrite this? Or we can't get this location. Can we? And so I was like, no, I'm not going back, because therefore they're just going to make me keep doing work. And, I know lots of writers' ambition is to be on set and to be, but like really it's I find it like stressful and boring. And, the writer's job is to have done all that work beforehand. And to be around if there's any emergencies, but yeah, I like that the whole thing of a showrunner. I find I'm very phobic about that, just because like you have no idea most people have no idea what a showrunner is, and the amount of responsibility is can be overwhelming, and you have to, it only suits certain personalities as well. So I'm like, stick to writing, it's fine. If you want to direct, fine. But you don't have to direct. So yeah, I'm a bit more purist writer.
And the work that you've done, it's very interesting because, like, number one, you're not afraid of like tackling big issues of class or domestic abuse, and I definitely have a kind of a unifying theme of how these big things sort of impact the personal, and like these big moments. I suppose that is all storytelling in some ways, but what do you think is your voice? Like what are the things that like makes it a Malcolm project, and you're like, yes, I can see my way in, I can see the meat of this, it's the project that I want, as opposed to like what kind of things would you not be too interested in get, and like, I don't want to, you probably don't want to say that because you're like, no, I wanted the offer. Like,
No, no,
know,
no, I
people say
don't.
no, but like, but it's almost like, yeah, I've no interest in elevated horror. It does nothing for me. Or yeah, is like, what are the things that you're like, this is my story, these are the things that are my voice.
I have no interest in elevated horror, at all. No, there are. I mean, I think because I've been doing it quite a while now, like I have developed my own taste, and I understand my inner tuning fork and what works for me, and and I think I have an I have, whether it comes across or not, and certain people in my household might dispute this, but like I have an understanding of the human condition and how people think and feel. And like I grew up in a, talking about class, but I grew up in a very working class kind of house and background, and where you saw people struggle through various things and issues in their lives, and but also like very lovely family home as well. So like my family was big. My family was both Scottish and Irish, and I grew up in England. So I kind of got to spend time in different worlds. So already, I guess, it was kind of like those foundations for me, kind of observing people, and the stories I'm drawn to are just stuff that feels real, like, and truthful and honest, and I'm probably using the same word to, but like, and stories with heart and hope. I
Yeah.
think because like I think you can tell really difficult stories as long as there's like we've seen them and they've been made, and I've there are certain British social realist filmmakers who just have this kind of compulsion to tell stories which are like unremittingly bleak,
Yeah.
and like of course, like we all know that these stories exist, especially if you've lived in that world or you've experienced it yourself. But and fine, that there's a place to hold the mirror up and show those stories. But I also think, as a view, you want an audience to see this as well, like, and you want an audience to feel something, but to feel like we use the word catharsis as well, like to go, okay, I recognize that, but there is, and I'm feeling something, but there is a bit of hope here, you know,
Yeah.
and so throughout, like I'm always looking for, hope and the possibility of change, and that kind of stuff.
You are profoundly, I think, empathetic and empathetic to your characters. And the thing watching your work that I don't see is the anger. If I was to write what Richard did, I'd be so angry. And watching it, I'm so angry. But I think watching your work, I think the hopefulness, yes, but it's almost like a profound empathy. Like, people are flawed and struggling, and but it's so, yeah, you're with all of them and like really like in their bones, watching them, like watching the characters play out, and all, like, even all your side characters, when you see them, you're kind of in their head. That's what I see when I see your work, is just like a lot of generosity for everyone.
Well, thank you. The thing is as well, like you have to, like, as I've discovered, like if you're writing a role and somebody's going to be cast in it, you don't want to just give them nothing. You want to give them a kind of a round. You want to pay as much attention to the smaller characters, because if you're lucky, you get really brilliant actors come in and just do one scene, and it just makes it elevates it. And so yeah, it is like to pay attention to everybody is like I've found helpful. But I think also you got to understand and not judge your characters as well. And so there are certain characters I've written, in those films, you go like, they're not pleasant human beings, but there's probably a reason for that. And so like let's look at that. And some of it might come out on screen, but as long as you have some understanding of it, then you give the actor something to play with, that they go, okay, they're not a monster. What they've done is monstrous in the case of maybe herself and the domestic abuser, but they were a couple at one point and then things went wrong, or there's a reason why that man has become that man, And is it because something happened in his past, or like, and so I think just giving the audience clues and helping them to understand it, they're watching a character and having a bit of a journey with that character as well. So they're going, oh, like, that's appalling. However, still a human being, and I, at home, I'm kind of like, I've got a very brilliant, militant kind of political son. And like the conversations we have at the dinner table, he's always like, you're always trying to like play the centrist, because I'm going, well, like you have to see it from their point of view. And he's going, you don't have to see it. Those people are awful. And I'm going, well, and maybe I've just trained myself as a writer to go, they are awful. What they've done, their actions are awful, but they're still human beings. So let's try and understand who they are to understand why their decisions and actions are appalling.
Maybe there's an optimism, a hopefulness in even the darker, the way that you like, and I'm not afraid to face those darker issues, but it's almost like the energy that you get, like it's like that untangible thing when you watch it. Like I can sometimes, because I watch so many things, I can like feel people's rage in the film, or like the bit of that, like I can feel things and I'd be like, yeah, no, you do get that. A kind of hopefulness, like even when people are kind of badly drawn, like he's a very unpleasant guy, but yeah, there's and what I really liked as well is the rage, like she's angry in herself, like that was really enjoyable to watch, because like so often like male writers will write just pleasant, earnest women who try really hard, and I'm like, yeah, like there's plenty of that, but like people are objectively angry. It's like, it's very interesting, but it's lovely. Like it's lovely to watch your work. And yeah, it just feels like there's so much kind of truth in it, emotional truth to watch. Like, are there things in terms of those projects? Is it that you have so many kind of on the go on the slate, and these are the ones that get financed? Do you have like the drawer of ideas? Like what? Yeah.
No, I've been quite lucky in that, I've been paid to write 4 feature films, and like 3 of them have been made.
Stop.
No, I mean, it's like, so like, and there's a lot of, but then what I do is I'll also do them. It's probably not, I wouldn't kind of recommend this to writers really, because you always like, so I was able to go and do Bad Sisters in order to help me kind of tick along on 500 miles, but I don't have a lot of projects. I can't do it. My brain doesn't work that way. I like to just kind of be, like I'm from a mining background, and in my house, like my wife says, oh, you're like a pit pony. You just like, it's kind of just going down on a single track. And I think I will things into existence, but, like it's not me doing that. It's just like, it's everybody else who's involved in the project are doing that, the really like hard bits of like making them, trying to find the finance. But I will do everything I can from a script writing point of view to make it compelling and something that when people read it, it's like they have to pay attention to it. But no, like I've been lucky. I've done like lots of telly, and telly generally like pays well, and allows you to keep going, and so yeah, I'll kind of fluctuate, but it'll depend. Like I have a screenplay that I'm working on at the moment, which is in a pretty good shape, and I can like I've no idea whether that will happen or not. But I've also I'm working on a TV series that's going into production in a few weeks' time, and that's pretty full on.
Fabulous. What is it?
I can't tell
you. Are you
you.
not like, oh no?
I think probably no, because it's top secret for like reasons.
Oh, that's so exciting.
But it's a factual drama. That's all I can say. And like and so yeah, so that's kind of happening, and will be on TV screens probably in February of next year. But yeah, so that's kind of that's quite a big undertaking. So once that's kind of out the way, maybe I can return to the screenplay and nudge that along, and but like I don't have I'm not massively ambitious. I'm not. In fact, I'm not ambitious at all. I've had 3 films made. I think that's amazing. I'm so pleased with myself, and I've had some very good telly made as well, and but I've no desire to keep writing films. I think if something comes along and I go, oh, I can do that, because going back to your earlier question, I think as a writer you kind of go, you have to convince yourself there's only you that can do it in order for it to happen, which is ridiculous because there's thousands out there, but there's only you know what makes you laugh and feel, and and when you're adapting something, that's a privilege because you get to use somebody's existing material, but and you shape it in the way that you bring your own taste to it.
And is it easier to adapt? Is it harder to kind of bring your own clay and it be your clay and then see it objectively, or is it just a different process?
I think adapting is, I remember listening to Nick Hornby talk about this he was being very kind of flippant about it, but it was just the great thing about adapting is, you probably spent 30 years as a writer coming up with original work and have burned out and have nothing more to say. And adapting gives you the opportunity to play with somebody else's sandpit, and then you go, oh, why don't you try that? Or, so adapting is, it's tricky and it's a skill, but, it's a lot of it is selection and bringing yourself to it, because you can't do it without bringing yourself to it. And then, maybe having the opportunity to depart from the source and, then do your own thing with it, which, both what Richard did, which was based on Bad Day in Black Rock, and then 500 Miles, which was 421 miles from home. So it's there's definitely the DNA of those original sources is there, but when you adapt, books are designed to be read over time, and films have to be watched in one sitting. And so they're completely different mediums, and so when you're thinking about adapting, you have to kind of go, okay, how do I turn a 500-page novel into a 2-hour experience that you're watching in the cinema? You have to make selections and follow different paths, and so you do a lot of thinking about it, but then you kind of go, okay, well, here's the film.
What's your opinion then on voiceover in terms of adapting a book? Do you is it cheating to do the voiceover? Do you get it?
Books are, largely internal, aren't they? I mean, they kind of depends. I mean, some books, you read them and you go, oh, I can see the film here. I'm not great at doing it, but I can see why when people have my wife has worked on many successful adaptations, and you can, and of those books, you kind of go, oh, I can see how you guys have picked this up because it lends itself to the screen. And
do you guys support each other's craft? Because she's behind some of the, I know her work well. I didn't realize you guys were married. I was like, well, what a great. Do you guys kind of feed into each other's projects at the point, or is it church and state?
We've worked together, and I mean, she's brilliant. She's I think she's exceptional, and she's got a really, she's got very good taste, and she gives brilliant notes as well. But no, I mean, largely, I think we're supportive of each other because we understand what it's like to kind of work in that world. But I think we're always kind of aspiring to not work as well. And we have 2 kids, and so you kind of want to, carve out some space, for yourselves and the family, and but I think it's easy because you can have a shorthand. When she's giving me notes, this happened a few years ago. She was giving me notes, but we had to schedule a conversation that was happening in our own home, that. But she was very good about that, and I'm going, in my head I'm going, why have you not read that draft? Oh, it's because there's a meeting coming up in 3 days' time. But when she gives me notes, I can tell the tenor of the notes is different to how she would speak to other writers, because she's just more direct. And that's that's kind of what you're looking for with your collaborative partners. You kind of want them to have a shorthand where they can just say to you, honestly, that's not working, can you try this? And Morgan and I developed that kind of shorthand, and the better note givers are able to do it with kindness, but have kind of a, can you try this? Give it a go.
There's certain points where I suppose you just need feedback to make it better. That you're like you do want people, like, the certain points where you're just like, I just feel sad and I want someone to tell me I'm great just for a minute. But then it's like, no, we have to make this better and we have X amount of time.
Yeah.
Just the
So there's a brilliant. I remember going to a talk that Hanif Qureshi and Roger Michell. So Hanif Qureshi did My Beautiful Laundrette, and he was both a novelist and a playwright, and Roger Michell was, who did Notting Hill, one of my favorite films. But when they worked together quite a lot and did some really lovely British films. But Hanif Qureshi was kind of saying, they were talking about the note giving process, and oftentimes he would get a hard copy of his script back, and in the top right hand corner would be MB. And, the first time he was like, what's this? And it was Roger Michell saying, make better. And so this was kind of a running joke that Morgan and I had. So occasionally he would just write MB and something's not working. We can't quite put our fingers on it, but, how can this scene do more or be funnier or, so, it's nice when you've got like a creative partner who can, be honest with you. And, they can be the tone police. You're already your own tone cop, but, they're the main tone police as well.
When you're down the mining away,
yeah.
Do you ever struggle to see the thing as a whole? When do you know you're finished mining?
It's hard, especially early days. I mean, like when you're trying to find a story, try and map it out, but often it's just kind of a process of discovery, and you realizing some stuff's working, and it's only and I wish it got easier, and it doesn't get easier. On this TV show that I'm doing, there are some drafts which I've found really hard, and you can which means probably it's not working, and that does come out in the wash. And then some you go, and I don't ever quite get into the flow, but I just feel like it's working better. And, then when you hand it over, people respond very positively. And that kind of is helpful, because that feeling that you had when you were writing it is coming back at you. But it's hard to kind of, when you're in the, when you're in the infantry, you often need somebody to be in a helicopter above you, kind of going, oh, there, look, oh, go over there, and you mixing metaphors. But when you're in the weeds, it's quite hard to kind of, separate yourself and be objective and know where to go. And so that's why we need collaborators. You need a director or a really good creative producer, script editors to kind of manage you and manage the story as well.
Of course. And I think this is just such a gorgeous film, and there's so much enjoyable. What do you kind of hope people take away from this when they watch it?
I think just this one, I just want people to have felt like they've recognized something from their lives, maybe, but understand, why we told the story in that particular way, and to kind of go, this is, we're often asked kind of, why did you tell that story? And I could talk about kind of my particular reasons, but that's quite self-indulgent. But, you kind of want to, I wanted to tell a story about a family in crisis, and, to find some degree of hope for them, even when it's, sometimes the worst things that can happen, because we don't all, we're, even those people who are going through the worst things in life, they have, they don't always have a cloud hanging over them in their life, that they find, we find humor to kind of, as a coping mechanism, and, or we find a way out to keep living, and, I just want, if, you just want an audience to go, okay, I felt something there, and maybe I'm not used to feeling things anymore, but I really felt something, and I think people do feel things watching this film.
Yeah, they do. Well, you do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's rare. And then go, okay, well, and then what's it about? And then just have a conversation about it. And it may not, you may not have been through some of the stuff that these characters have been through, but maybe you just find it relatable and you have a conversation about it. That's all you can ask for, really. Yeah.
And it is. And thank you so much. It's such a gorgeous film. And then we'll keep our eyes peeled also for that show.
Oh, yeah. Get me back on for the telly.
100%. Oh, thank you so much.
No, thank you. That's really enjoyed that.
Thank you so much for listening. So 500 Miles is in cinemas on the 15th of May. Make sure to subscribe to Film Ireland wherever you get your podcasts.